The American Lyceum rebuilds the institution of debate as a cornerstone of our democracy. Once vital and informative, presidential debates have devolved into disrespectful, open mic,
because you'd be in jail,
cage matches.
For the Republic to survive, we the people must learn to talk to one another again. The Lyceum format is focused on finding solutions, not a binary resolution. 3 participants have 3 minutes to propose 3 ideas aimed at one problem. The American Lyceum. Let us rebuild the foundation of civil society. Welcome to the Lyceum debate on immigration. We have 3 fantastic guests who will answer the question, what are the top priorities for immigration policy in the United States? Our first speaker is Laura Collins, Director of Economic Growth at the George W. Bush Institute. She has a JD from the University of Texas. Our second speaker is Dr. Garett Jones, Professor of Economics at George Mason University and author of The Culture Transplant, new from Stanford University Press. Our third speaker is Theresa Cardinal Brown, Senior Advisor for Immigration and Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Theresa also worked at the Department of Homeland Security for years after the 9/11 attacks. Our first speaker today is Laura. Laura, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this debate. You know, at the Bush Institute, we really believe that America benefits from immigration, but we have a very outdated system, one that really doesn't serve the needs of our country anymore. And so a few ideas that I have are, 1, expand employment-based pathways to immigration. Most of you listening to this probably already know that our immigration system is really geared towards family reunification. That's not always bad. There's lots of good reasons that we have that. Lots of the people who come in on those types of visas and green cards are great contributors to the United States. But we know we also have big labor shortages right now. We know that our green card system really isn't geared towards people with less than a bachelor's degree. And there are a lot of jobs open for people like that who were not born in the United States who could come and contribute. So thinking about how to expand those employment-based pathways, whether it's with temporary worker visas or whether it's with green cards, I think is an important way that we can really bolster our labor force. I also think we need to rethink how we do adjustment of status in this country. So much of the green card backlog is a problem. It contributes to a loss of competitiveness in the United States. We know that there are people here on temporary worker visas who want to stay in the United States. They want to raise their families here. It's nearly impossible, depending on which country you're from, especially because of the caps that we have in place, to really make that a reality. And oftentimes we tell people, you can work, but your spouse can't work. And we might not let your children become citizens either. We lose people to Canada in the tens of thousands every year because of this, because Canada can offer those same people the opportunity to become a citizen within a couple of years. If we want to be competitive in the global race for talent, we really need to rethink what those procedures look like for taking people from temporary to permanent here. And last, so many people like to talk about the border. The border has a lot of nuance to it, but I think what we're really seeing right now with the high numbers of encounters at the border is not just about border policy and border security, but really it's about a refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere. And the way we respond to that is really important. We need to probably think globally and regionally about migration. It's not just about stopping people when they get to the border. How do we work with our partner countries in the region, our neighbors and our friends? It's not just Mexico and Canada either. We really need to be thinking about how we address migration across the entire Western Hemisphere, helping people find the ability to settle in places that are safe. There are other countries that probably need some labor too. What does it look like to have a range of possibilities? We know that not everybody who makes it to the border is going to qualify for resettlement in the United States. How do we use our American leadership and our values to make sure that we can play a role in helping the whole Western Hemisphere address this migration crisis?
Fantastic, Laura. Thank you. Now we're going to shift into our Q&A portion. We'll have a question from each of your rivals in this debate. I think some of them have actually both of our other speakers today have similar views, but we'll look at the differences now. Garett, I'm going to ask you to ask the first question.
Sure. How much weight do you put on the family reunification element? And what do you predict are like the second and third generation effects of giving a broad-based freedom of migration to people based on family reunification?
Well, I think that when you look at the data and something that we've looked at in the past, it shows that by, about the third generation, most immigrants or most children and grandchildren of immigrants are pretty comparable to native born Americans. So I don't worry too much about what those longer term effects are because I'm very confident in the United States' ability to integrate people. What I'm really more concerned about is, are the people we're bringing in able to fill the short term labor gaps that we have? And in some cases with family reunification, they are. We hear a lot actually here in Dallas about the home healthcare industry, for example, and how the reduction in immigration over the last couple of years has really impeded their ability to hire workers because they rely a lot on that labor force of new arrivals who came in on family-based visas. But I don't worry so much about it in the long term because I am confident in that integration ability of the United States. We really have done a great job of assimilating and integrating immigrants for decades, and I don't see that as being a future problem.
Great. Theresa, next question to you.
Thanks. Laura, you talked about the need for different kinds of treatment for asylum seekers at the border. How do you propose to address people who are coming who frankly don't meet our criteria for asylum in the United States, which are rather restrictive? What kinds of alternatives do you have?
I think this is where that first point that I made about employment-based pathways is really important. We know some of the people in Latin America particularly, they really just want a better paying job. If they had the ability to either self-sponsor or there was a different labor-based migration pathway for them, they might not try to come to the border and request asylum, which we know is their only existing legal pathway. So I think that we can throw a lot of different things at this problem. It doesn't all have to be about humanitarian migration.
Thanks so much, Laura. Our second speaker, Garett Jones, is up next. Garett, take it away.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I really believe that the United States should try to be the Bell Labs, the research and development core for the entire planet. The reason I think this is because U.S. innovation can really help the whole world. We're used to the idea that the U.S. military can actually defend freedom around the world. I think an important concept for the 21st century is that American innovation, American technology can help share ideas that help people around the world. We've seen this over the last few years with COVID vaccines, right? With the Moderna vaccine saving lives everywhere. Similarly, R&D, whether it's happening in Silicon Valley, whether it's happening in Texas, this can be helping people around the world. The thing is that R&D and innovation is really sensitive to worker skills. We need a lot of skilled workers to pull this off. Behind that, it's really clear looking across countries that innovation, R&D, patenting are really sensitive to a government's institutional quality. So it's important that our immigration policy plant the seeds and build the foundation so that generations from now, the U.S. will continue to have good institutions and I hope have even better institutions, higher savings rates, higher levels of trust, a freer market. So how can immigration policy affect this? It's been clear over the last 5 centuries that migration has changed institutional quality around the world. We routinely in economics refer to the neo-Europes and the neo-Chinas that are offshoots shaped heavily by migration from, in one case, Western Europe, and in the case of Southeast Asia, and particularly Chinese migration. And these migrations have actually improved institutional quality in countries around the world, as far as we can tell. And I think these trends can continue and we can build on them with a prudent, skills-based immigration policy. So what I really hope for is that U.S. immigration policy going forward focuses on trying to bring in people with the best skills, using traditional measures of human capital, education levels, and STEM-type degrees. And I hope that we put some small weight on bringing in migrants from countries that have high levels of average income and have some tradition of liberal institutions. I think that my institutions do tend to migrate to a substantial, if imperfect degree, and good policy should take that into account. Most of our weight should be on skills, some smaller weight on migrants' country of origin traits like GDP per capita and a tradition of liberal freedoms. And together, I think that can help make America not just keeping it as good as it is now, but making it even better for the entire world.
Great presentation by Dr. Jones. Now I'm going to turn over to our Q&A session. And I think since each of you will get a chance to ask the first question, this would be Theresa Cardinal Brown's opportunity to ask a question of you.
Thank you. Dr. Jones, let me ask you, though, it seems to me a little bit that on one hand, you're looking at skills-based immigration and seeing how that can keep the United States competitive and innovative, but then you also want to look at country of origin. And I just want to ask, if they're able to contribute to our innovation, why should it matter what country they come from?
Well, I believe that country of origin traits like GDP per capita and liberal democracy experience should get a small weight. I think most of the weight should go on people's individual skills. So if you want to think about a ratio that I think would hold up, it'd be something like 5 to 1, 5 times more weight on skills. So people from countries that are poor, people from countries that are illiberal should be able to come in if they are bringing exceptional skills. And so I think that's the right way to do it, is to put most of the weight on the individual's traits. I think that's part of the American tradition. I also think it's a good statistical practice. But I think giving some weight to realizing that countries, that migrants will ultimately make the countries they move to a lot like the ones they left is something we can't forget.
All right, next question from Laura Collins.
Thank you. I'm curious how you define high-skilled or important skills, because this is a big part of the debate around employment-based migration. Is it just education? Is it STEM? Like, what makes someone's skills valuable when we know that there are people with less than a bachelor's degree who really do contribute to this country?
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, as so often in economics, all of our measures are bad. I was trained in monetary economics, and I know that all of our measures of the money supply are mediocre at best. The same thing's true when it comes to measuring people's skills. We're going to make wrong decisions, but the cleanest dirty shirt in the room is going to be something like STEM degrees, partly because we know that those are degrees that are just a little bit harder to fake than other degrees. So you're right. I think we should have a lot of construction workers. I think we should find ways to have good metrics of that. But the old-fashioned measures are going to be what we have to go with, recognizing they will be imperfect.
Great Q&A session. Now we're going to shift to our final opening statement from Theresa Cardinal Brown. Theresa, go ahead.
So thank you so much for inviting me to the Lyceum debate. I'm going to say that all of our answers here are focusing on immigration policy. Laura mentioned the border, and I noticed we're not focusing on border policy, and I think that's okay. There are a lot of different answers for the border, but I think we're focusing on how we should structure our immigration system writ broadly. So my 3 points are, first, I think to restructure our immigration system, we actually need to deal with the leftovers of our last immigration system, which means we need to figure out what we do with the undocumented population in the United States. We know that there's an estimated 10 to 11 million people who are in an unauthorized status. We know that majorities of the American public, regardless of party, support providing a way for those who are undocumented to get right with the law. But one of the things I think we fail to recognize is that we used to have regular ways that people who are undocumented could get right with the law. Just like in our criminal justice system, there's a way to serve a period of probation, pay a penalty or a fine, and then be right with society. We used to have ways in our immigration system that allowed somebody who was in an unauthorized status to make their way back on the right side of the law. We cut most of those out in the mid-1990s, and now really the only way for anybody to get right with the law is to either be deported and stay outside the United States for 10 years or self-deport and stay outside of the United States for at least 10 years, sometimes permanently. But that means we're losing a lot of potential human capital in the United States. So I would suggest we need to revisit some of those pathways, one of which was called registry, which said if you've been able to make a life in the United States and have ties in the United States and have been here for 20 years or more, can pass a background check, essentially we can let you become a permanent resident. Now we can require other things like paying back taxes or a penalty, but keeping that in our statute and allowing essentially a statute of limitations to work would provide a way for people to actively on their own get right with the law. So that's my first option. Secondly, I think we need to rethink how we fund our immigration system. And by this, I mean our legal immigration system. We have seen, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, the complete just breakdown of our functioning legal immigration system over inability to pay our bills and clear out backlogs. And that's because mostly it's funded by fees, not congressional appropriations, and we need to rethink that. Lastly, a little bit along the lines of what Dr. Jones said, I think we need to create a separate agency that looks at data and economics and consults with a wide variety of stakeholders to determine how much immigration and what kind of immigration we need to this country. And it should be done on a regular basis. Right now, our immigration system is set in statutory rock and can't be changed unless our dysfunctional Congress can get its act together. And the longer it takes to do that, the longer it's mild in political divisions, the more out of sync with our needs our immigration system is getting. So those are my 3 points.
Fantastic. Thank you, Theresa. Now we're going to shift to our Q&A. We're going to have Laura Collins ask our first question. Laura, go ahead.
Thank you, Theresa, for all those points. President Bush, when he was president, used to say that we needed to deal with the undocumented without amnesty and without animosity. How do you see something like registry fitting into that sort of framework and how we think about these people?
Yeah, I think part of the difficulty is that we're defining amnesty in a lot of different ways. I think what registry does is essentially acknowledge a reality. More than half of the people who are undocumented in the United States right now have been here for more than 20 years. A lot of them, probably at least a quarter of them or more, have U.S. citizen children, are married to U.S. citizens, but can't otherwise regularize their status. And so they are part and parcel of our American society already. I think the issue really is what are the requirements to get right with the law. Again, in our judicial system, there's a period of probation. You have to check in with your parole officers or your probation officers. You have to stay, out of trouble. Maybe you're not allowed to associate with people who were part of your past life, whatever. We can put requirements on it, but I think the idea that we have to set a special amnesty every so often doesn't really make sense. Creating pathways by which people can, on their own initiative, get back on the right side of the law is a better way to go.
All right, fantastic. Garett, you get the last question.
Yes. So I really like this idea of finding a pathway to help people normalize their status. So do you think there's a way to make that sort of pathway basically more appealing to irregular migrants who are likely to bring more to the table, basically higher skilled migrants, those who've built businesses, whose employees have paid a lot of taxes? Is there a path to that?
Well, I think we got a couple of different issues going on here. One is new immigration to the United States, and I think we've all sort of discussed pieces of that. When we're talking about the unauthorized in the United States, some of them probably do have skills. I think the biggest group there are your so-called dreamers. The kids who were brought here to the United States illegally as children, were raised in the United States, educated in our system. An awful lot of them have now gone to college, but don't have a way other than congressional action to become permanent citizens of the United States. I think that's, if you will, the most likely to meet the skills kind of requirements that you're talking about. And we should find a way to legalize their status immediately. I think in terms of future regularizations, again, you could put kind of criteria on it. I would argue that if somebody's been able to make their way in the United States and contribute meaningfully without having legal status for 20 years, probably that's somebody that we'd want to keep in the United States regardless of their skill level.
We're going to shift now to closing statements. They'll be in the same order that the opening statements were. That means Laura Collins will speak first. Laura, go ahead.
Thank you. We really do hear a lot of good ideas on this debate. And if you had a bunch of other speakers, you hear a bunch of other good ideas. But we're not going to really have an immigration system that meets the future needs of this country, that ensures our prosperity and security and vitality, if we don't really take on the ability to have more people here based on skills, if we don't really rethink that refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere. Migration doesn't stop just because we change our laws and our policies here in the United States. It's going to continue regardless of that. We need to be realistic about this. We need to have a system that meets the needs of our country now, meets the needs of our country in the future, and is realistic about the challenges that we face. And so you've heard some good ideas here today. I don't necessarily agree with having your country of origin be a part, even a small part of a requirement for admitting people. I really do think that anyone around the country who wants to be an American that we can make them an American and that they can be a contributor here. And so many of the immigrants of the past came from places that didn't have freedom. We've seen that over and over. In fact, my own colleague here, Joseph Kim, is a North Korean refugee. He experienced none of the freedoms that we have here, and he is a wonderful American and a great contributor to this country. I also, not convinced about a commission, Theresa, on raising those caps. I would want maybe an automatic qualifier, something built into the law that says, if the economic conditions are right, we get a bump up. But I still think it's a good idea to really address those caps. We know those hinder our immigration system. And, again, there's lots of great ideas out there, but if we're not willing to meet the needs that we have now and look in the future, we're not going to have a system that works for us.
That was a home run. Okay. Garett Jones, closing statement, 2 minutes. Go.
We shouldn't hope that immigrants assimilate. We should hope that immigrants make the rest of us better. The U.S. should push for an immigration policy where the people who come in are better than the rest of us on average. We should hope for an immigration policy where those migrants in turn shape the rest of us and help us be better. A lot of social experiences are contagious, right? If you're around people who are more frugal, that helps you be a little more frugal. If you're around people who are a little more trusting, that might make you a little more trusting, or maybe even a little more trustworthy. And if you're around people who are a little bit better educated, that might help inspire your children to work a little harder in school. So there are multiple ways in which our immigration policy should not be built around the hope that immigrants assimilate. Instead, it should be built around the belief, the evidence-based belief, that migrants on average will make the place they move to both like the place they left, and that migrants will bring their traits and help change those around them. An important example of this was the great migration of African Americans from the South to the North through the 20th century. When African Americans moved from the South to the North, they didn't assimilate to the political views of the North. Instead, they changed the views of Northerners. White Northerners became more likely to support civil rights, the civil rights movement, when there were more African Americans moving into their neighborhood. So the people around us shape us, and we should encourage a kind of immigration system that brings individuals who are more trusting, better educated, more frugal to help make the rest of us better.
All right. Wonderful to hear your thoughts. Our final closing statement today is from Theresa Cardinal Brown.
Thanks, Tim. I think I would agree with all of our speakers that immigration has the potential to make America very, very great. But I would say immigration already has made America great. We have a long history of immigration, of immigrants coming from all over the world with all kinds of skill sets, making us who we are today. If immigration wasn't a positive, we wouldn't be the country we are today. So I think when we think about what immigration might make us in the future, I think we need to be very humble about what immigration has done for us so far. I think that we do need to, however, think about how we make our immigration system better. And I think some of the ideas that we've talked about today are really important. One of the things I wasn't able to really get to in my remarks is why our immigration system is set in stone by Congress, particularly with regard to numbers. I mean, one reason I don't necessarily agree with Garett's assessment that immigrants will change the country very much is because we let in such a tiny percentage of our population as immigration each year. It is amongst the lowest of all of the developed nations. So such a tiny percentage is, I think we're more likely to change them than they are to change us in fundamental ways. But we can do a better job at recognizing those who have already built lives in the United States by giving them a way to earn status. And I also think that we can think about funding an immigration system that can help make these decisions, whether it's a commission or another way that we can adapt our immigration system much more regularly to the needs of our country. We haven't upgraded our immigration laws in at least 30 years, depending on who you talk to, 40 if you go back to 1986. That is far, far too long to have a stagnant immigration system for a country as dynamic as the United States.
That was fantastic. Wow. Thank you. I'm going to be thinking about that. Thank you.
This is good. I was going to say factual, fascinating, and passionate. Loved it.
Can we turn that into a YouTube short?
Yeah. Thanks for watching. There are 3 ways you can help us strengthen civil society. 1, like this video. 2, share the link. And 3, subscribe to the Lyceum Debates YouTube channel. Now that you've heard the debate, it's time to cast your vote for what you think were the best ideas. Here's how it works. Go to the AmericanLyceum.org debates page to cast your vote. Or you can go directly to the voting page by clicking the link in the description below. This debate was made possible thanks to the J.P. Conte Family Foundation. If you support our effort to rebuild American civil society, please make a donation to the Lyceum right now. Your donation will be tax deductible and is deeply needed. Go to theamericanlyceum.org. Thanks again to all the Lyceum donors who are rebuilding American civil society.